Welcome, dear colleagues, to our lively roundtable, where today we embark on a journey through the cerebral alleys of James Joyce's Ulysses. This tome has undeniably etched its mark on literary history.
Indeed, Hal, Ulysses nests comfortably within the zeitgeist of the early 20th century, mirroring the cultural ruptures and transformations of the era.
It's remarkable how Joyce's work pushed the boundaries of narrative form, encouraging us to reconceptualize storytelling itself. And let's not forget its ripple effect on popular culture and visual arts. Joyce was ahead of his time, engaging with media in ways that artists are only now beginning to explore.
A polarizing reception, though. For every reader enamored with its brilliance, there seems to be another lost in its labyrinth.
Historical context is key. The Ireland Joyce portrays and the literary traditions he grapples with breathe life into his opus.
Hal, not to step on your toes, but mentioning historical context seems to soften the blow of Joyce's audacious departure from those very traditions.
Quite right, Amelia. Ulysses was a bold leap, not just a step, and opened up new realms of possibility in literature.
There's no denying Joyce broke the mold. His influence is like a meteor crash. Art and culture will forever bear the impact crater. And despite the complexities, it's the innovations, stream of consciousness, intricate wordplay, that have cemented Ulysses in the pantheon of modern literature.
That's assuming one can navigate the Odyssey of his language, jazz. It's an undertaking not all readers are willing or able to commit to.
True, Lenny, but Joyce's intent wasn't to coddle his readers, but to mirror the times and the city that so defined him. It's an enlightening form of sabotage on customary prose.
Enlightenment that demands some reckoning. Yet when the tide of Joyce's intricate prose washes over you, it's like awakening to a new literary dawn.
A literary dawn, indeed. And with that, I think we're warmed up. Let's delve deeper into these rich waters. Today, we delve into the stream of consciousness technique in Joyce's Ulysses. This narrative form seems to mirror the intricacies of human thought. Amelia, your insights here would be invaluable.
It's quite fascinating. Joyce not only captures the ebb and flow of consciousness, but reflects on how our minds operate. We slip from past memories into present observations, embodying true mental processes.
It's a double-edged sword, though. Readers either revel in this exploration or recoil at its complexity. It's not everyone's cup of tea.
True, Lenny. From a neurological standpoint, it's an accurate representation, but that doesn't make it easily digestible. Yet, this complexity invites a deeper engagement with the text. And isn't it captivating how it connects to early avant-garde film? Those jump cuts resemble our thoughts skipping from scene to scene.
History has seen narrative forms evolve, so here's Joyce quite radically, pushing us towards literary impressionism, you might say.
Philosophically speaking, this method forces readers to confront their own self-awareness through the characters' introspections.
Absolutely, and we can't ignore how it breaks down barriers between the reader and character. It's intimate, almost voyeuristic.
Heated, but good points all around. I'd say the voyeuristic element is precisely what blurs the line between art and audience.
But to what end? Is the reader's discomfort worth the payoff? I believe, unlike a film that guides its audience visually, Ulysses asks perhaps too much of its readers.
Interestingly, the demands of Ulysses echo how we now interact with technology, constantly navigating streams of information.
It's not just about the reader's experience, it's about legacy. Just as writers before Joyce influenced his style, he in turn shapes the future.
You're onto something, Mick. Joyce isn't about the destination, it's the journey through consciousness that's revolutionary.
Each of you raises excellent points. This technique does bridge the intimate with the intellectual, shaping both the reader's journey and the literary landscape. The Odyssey stands as one of literature's greatest epics, and Joyce's ambition to map its complexities onto the canvas of modern life is, I find, nothing short of genius. His Leopold Bloom, the everyman, shares a timeless voyage with Homer's Odysseus.
Indeed, Hal. The brilliance of Ulysses lies in its ability to transpose the epic themes of the Odyssey into the everyday life of early 20th century Dublin. Joyce redefines what it means to be a hero in the modern age.
Heroes in dusty tomes are one thing, but Joyce brings forth a new perspective. The Homeric parallels serve not just as a scaffold, but also as a sharp contrast to the pedestrian lives his characters lead.
And these Homeric echoes reverberate into our time, having paved the way for countless reinterpretations in modern storytelling, particularly in the sci-fi and fantasy space. They're cultural anchors that hold while the streams of the new world run past them. Yet, is repackaging old myths what makes modern narratives contemporary?
Hold on. Not to rain on the parade, but how many readers actually catch those parallels? Can one fully appreciate Ulysses without a degree in classical literature?
Lenny, it's about the universality of myth, a common language beneath the surface. Even if you've never read Homer, you feel the resonance, the shared journey.
The informed reader undoubtedly gleans more, but the beauty lies in the nuance and the ability to evoke a sense without explicit understanding.
Exactly, Hal. It's about human experience. And Odyssey's motifs, journey, trial, growth, they're embedded in us, in our collective storytelling DNA.
Yet one cannot ignore that myths have been reshaped drastically in contemporary culture. Joyce started this, but where he used myth to tell modern stories, today we often see the opposite. Modern stories are used to retell myths. It's cyclical, isn't it? Joyce tapped into these eternal stories, and now we're experiencing a renaissance of mythic storytelling thanks to him.
Cyclical, perhaps. But let's be pragmatic. Much of Joyce's work could be considered cryptic. The density of his narrative almost requires a Homeric legend as a companion guide.
Yet, Lenny, it's that very complexity that has spurred a century of dialogue. It doesn't simply hand over its treasures, it demands exploration. Don't you agree?
Indeed, great literature should challenge us, force us to dig deeper. In Ulysses, we're not mere observers. We're explorers, unraveling the tapestry of a grand tradition interwoven into the fabric of a single, ordinary day. Joyce was not just creating a story, he was painting with words, offering an entirely new perspective on the elasticity of the English language.
His linguistic experimentation is an exciting intersection between Joyce, the writer, and Joyce, the linguistic innovator. It's like he's using Dublin as his canvas, and language becomes his palette.
It brought a whole new vitality to storytelling, anchoring us so deeply in the period's historical context that even the language evolves across the novel.
If you think about it, the way he manipulates syntax and diction is but a microcosm of the brain's cognitive functions, a dance between meaning and perception.
All this linguistic gymnastics, though, it can be a barrier. I've seen readers trip over that complexity like a high hurdle. It sometimes comes across more esoteric than inventive.
But Lenny, those hurdles can be the most rewarding part. The complexity invites us to explore the very limits of language. Joyce subverts norms to reflect the emotional and psychological complexity of his characters.
Precisely, Amelia. Complexity denotes richness, and each rereading of the text peels away another layer of meaning, often revealing new interpretations.
Hal, richness is one thing, but accessibility is another. Not everyone has the time or scholarly background to decode Joyce's every nuance.
True, Lenny, but consider how this mirrors real life. We don't always understand every nuance of each conversation we overhear or partake in. Joyce captures that authenticity beautifully.
He does, Izzy. And think about how his creation of new compound words and novel uses of existing words has expanded our lexicon. He touches on universal themes in such a localized setting.
Absolutely. Yet the implication that language itself is a living, evolving entity is fascinating. It's almost as if Joyce presages the fluidity of language we observe in the digital age.
Jazz, you give him much credit, but I see your point. After all, languages are but vehicles for human thought across time, and Joyce knew how to drive this vehicle on new roads, so to speak.
The way you all engage with the text speaks volumes about Joyce's impact. He's created a literary dialogue with us and also among us. Let's pivot now to the heart of Ulysses, the city of Dublin itself. Joyce was masterful in how he made a city so alive, it essentially became a core character. Thoughts on this embodiment?
Indeed, Joyce's Dublin is not just a backdrop. It's pulsating with life, dictating the rhythm of the characters' movements and encounters.
And it's more than that. It's a microcosm of post-colonial Ireland, grappling with its identity, a theme Joyce weaves throughout the narrative.
Historical context is key. Dublin at the turn of the century was teeming with political undercurrents that Joyce captures and magnifies, giving us a deeper understanding of that period.
But let's be clear, while historically rich, the granular details can crowd the narrative. Is knowing the price of a leg of mutton in 1904 truly critical to the story's impact?
A valid point, Lenny. The depth of detail does beg the question of narrative necessity versus atmospheric indulgence.
Each detail, no matter how small, adds to the realism of the setting. It anchors the novel in a time and place inextricably linked to the characters' lives.
There's also the aspect of urban psychology. The environmental cues in Ulysses offer a precursor to our current conversations about how urban spaces shape us. Right, Jazz? And that lends Ulysses its timeless quality. The exploration of the city impacts readers' perceptions of their own urban environments.
Yet we mustn't forget, Dublin is a lens through which Joyce examines the broader paralysis he sees in Irish society. His Dublin is a stymied character unto itself.
Hal, that's just it. The socioeconomic details Lenny finds cumbersome. They paint a vivid portrait of the mundane infused with the profound, which is the essence of modern life.
Thank you all. Vivid indeed. Dublin, as Joyce presents it, is both an actor and a reflection in this rich narrative. Let us take this further in our ongoing discussion. The motionlessness of life, or what Joyce referred to as paralysis, is central to many of his works, prominently in Dubliners. Now in Ulysses, I believe we see this thematic continuation, but how does this register with you, Mick, with your historical lens?
Paralysis is a powerful lens through which to view Dublin at the turn of the century. You see, the city was on the cusp of modernity, yet there was a prevailing sense of being stuck, culturally, politically. It's not just the characters who are paralyzed, it's the very city itself, afflicted by a historical inertia.
That's quite evocative, Mick. To take your point further, it reflects wider society, where entire social strata could feel stuck in time. Joyce articulates it so well that it's like a cautionary tale, warning us that stagnation is anathema to progress.
Building on Izzy's thought, it's fascinating how this idea dovetails with existentialism. It's almost as if Joyce's characters are unwillingly confronting Sartre's existence precedes essence. They are forced into defining themselves, even if that means acknowledging their own stagnation.
But don't you think there's a danger of over-intellectualizing these concepts? Sure, the thematic exploration is rich, but we must consider the reader's engagement. If every step forward is met with this paralysis, does it risk disengaging from the narrative?
Quite the contrary, Lenny. If you ponder the advancements in neuroscience, we're continually fighting against our own cognitive biases, our learned paralyses, if you will. Joyce's characters exemplify this struggle, making it incredibly relevant.
Jazz, you're touching on something vital, this juxtaposition of internal and technological progress.
Hal, allow me to interject. Joyce wasn't just presenting a state of stagnation. There's resistance to paralysis represented in the narrative. The characters are looking for meaning, for escape, a universal endeavor.
Well articulated, Amelia. They strive for significance against the backdrop of their limitations. That's a powerful piece of humanity that Joyce captures.
And isn't that juxtaposition, the search for meaning within paralysis, isn't that just the human condition? I think Joyce encapsulates it in a raw form.
The human condition you mention, Izzy, I concede it's beautifully rendered. Still, the manner in which it requires ferocious attention from the reader could be seen as a sort of literary paralysis, couldn't it?
Lenny, I sense a bit of irony there. But to bring this back, it's the religious and cultural undertones of the work that shed light on this paralysis. Joyce forces us to look at Dublin's and our own moral and societal strictures.
Faith and its role, or lack thereof, in moving society forward. We can see Joyce playing with this idea. Does the modern world free us from paralysis, or are we just caught in a new loop?
Very true, Jazz. No matter the era, humanity wrestles with these chains, whether self-imposed or societal. Joyce's profound observation is as timeless as it is potent.
That could be the very essence of his legacy, acknowledging that sometimes to move forward, we must recognize where we stand still.
Recognizing the stillness in our march forward is indeed profound. As we seek progress, part of us remains in Joyce's Dublin, wrestling with the chains of paralysis. Exploring the use of mythology in Ulysses, we must observe how Joyce effectively repurposes these ancient narratives. He subverts our expectations by transplanting mythical heroism onto the common man.
Joyce's take is almost prophetic in the way he portrays mythology. In today's scientific age, we find new myths and technology, which reflect back to us our modern quests and adventures.
And in that reimagination, Joyce revives these myths, showing us their timeless appeal and reinforcing their universality in our collective consciousness.
But while Joyce breathes new life into mythology, I wonder if by anchoring it in the profoundly local and quotidian, he risks diminishing the grandeur these stories once carried.
I can see your point, Mick. Yet, perhaps this is the grandeur of the everyday, heroic in its ordinariness.
Hold on, though. What good is the myth if the reader is estranged by its contemporary wrapping? Does it not become inapplicable to the very people it's trying to reach?
Isn't that the point, though, Lenny? Joyce challenges us to see the heroic in the everyday. To find Ulysses in Leopold Bloom is to find the extraordinary within the ordinary.
Exactly, Izzy. This fusion of the mythological and mundane doesn't diminish the myths. It gives them renewed relevance. Molly Bloom as Penelope, redefining the role of the waiting wife. Truly inspired.
Well said, Amelia. It's not a diminishment, but an evolution. My colleagues in the cognitive sciences admire the cognitive journey Joyce encourages, inviting readers to redefine heroism for themselves.
An evolution, yes, but the accessibility of myth is a two-way street. Joyce both opens it up and obscures it simultaneously. Wouldn't you agree, Hal?
True, the esoteric nature of Joyce's references creates a dichotomy of sorts. Intellectual elitism cohabits with the democratization of myth.
But that's art, isn't it? We're not all going to see the same things, and it's the discussion, the debate about these myths' meanings that enriches them.
You're romanticizing it, Izzy. If we're speaking of modern relevance, many readers struggle with Joyce's mythological labyrinth. Are we not alienating the very people we want to inspire?
Challenging the audience can be a form of respect, Lenny. Expecting readers to rise to the occasion isn't alienation, it's engagement with the text on a higher level.
And amidst that challenge lies an opportunity. Each reader's journey through Ulysses becomes their own Odyssey, with Joyce as the ultimate puppeteer of myth and man alike. Let's explore the fabric of gender within Joyce's narrative. How do we feel about this controversial topic?
Joyce paints a complex picture with his female characters, particularly Molly. He doesn't shy away from their sexuality or inner life. But I wonder, does this complexity truly transcend the period's gender norms, or does it reinforce them?
I commend your point, Izzy. Joyce is indeed attempting to give voice to a female perspective, especially in the monologue of Molly Bloom. It's a feminist move, presenting her innermost thoughts and desires so vividly.
At the risk of sounding contentious, Amelia, I'm skeptical. Joyce's attempt, albeit ambitious, isn't sufficient to qualify him as a feminist. It's important to consider the author's own biases and the era's male-dominated views.
It's a valid consideration, Lenny. The sincerity of Joyce's feminist leanings should certainly be analyzed in context.
Lenny's right to an extent. We have to judge these characters not just by today's standards, but within their historical and cultural context. Joyce captures the changing social mores of his time, whether we see that as sufficiently progressive or not.
Indeed, Mick, gender roles were evolving during Joyce's era. There's acknowledgement, but also subversion of norms in his writing. We can't ignore how our understanding of gender has drastically evolved since Joyce's time. His work allows us to retrospectively engage with gender dynamics in ways perhaps not entirely intended by Joyce himself.
Well said, Jazz. The very debate on Joyce's feminist representation is indicative of its multi-layered quality.
It's complex, no doubt. But let's not romanticize Joyce's treatment of women. Critical examination is our job here. recognizing flaws as well as triumphs.
A heated yet enriching segment. It seems Joyce's portrayal of gender is as layered and contested as much else in his work. Ulysses wasn't just a shift in Joyce's own writing, but a seismic event for the landscape of modernism. Joyce leveraged stream of consciousness, fragmented narrative, and collaged texts to reshape how stories could be told.
And the ripples of that event have been influencing writers for over a century now. Ulysses, as a teaching tool, has become almost ubiquitous in literature departments across the globe.
Indeed, science and technology today mirror this fragmentation. The internet, hypertext, these are the Ulysses of information dissemination.
But one might argue the pendulum has swung too far. Literature, like technology, can become too enamored with its own cleverness, losing the reader in its complexity.
I see your point, Lenny. But Ulysses didn't just complicate narrative for complexity's sake. It expanded the very concept of what narrative could encompass, reflecting a more honest human experience.
Much as I adore Joyce, this expansion has driven some readers to frustration. It's no secret Ulysses is considered by many to be difficult and inaccessible.
Yet consider how Joyce has directly influenced genres that value intricate narratives, like modern-day fantasy or sci-fi, with sprawling world-building and complex character arcs.
There's substance to that complexity, though, reflecting our very efforts to grapple with life's intricacies. Modern society, science, relationships, they're networks, not simple lines.
True, Jazz, but is that always beneficial? The risk is prioritizing form over content, losing essential story elements to technique's allure.
Mick, I recall you are well-versed in cultural movements. Could you comment on this within the broader modernist context?
Of course, Hal. The thing is, Joyce was a part of this intellectual zeitgeist that was determined to break free from the shackles of traditional narrative and morality. Ulysses embodied this beautifully.
And let's not overlook the visual arts at the time. Modernist painters broke away from realism, just as Joyce broke away from traditional narrative structures.
Mick, Izzy, you both make strong points. Joyce's contemporaries across the arts shared similar convictions about form and structure. Joyce was, in many ways, a man of his time, a spearhead in literature.
As always, our history informs our present. Ulysses may well have set a precedent, challenging subsequent generations to innovate or react against it.
And currently, with AI and virtual realities, we are crafting new narratives, vastly different, yet arguably tracing back to Joycean experimentation.
An intriguing thought. Whether we wield Joyce's techniques for better storytelling, or simply to mirror the chaos of contemporary life, that is the question we are left with.
It's both, isn't it? We use these techniques to make sense of chaos while also telling stories that resonate on a deeply human level.
Without Joyce, we wouldn't have the same literary toolbox to draw from. He gave us language for the inexpressible.
It seems then Ulysses provided a literary framework that echoes into the works of today, informing and evolving our understanding of modernist principles. James Joyce's relationship with religion is as complex as it is provocative. Ulysses weaves sacred and profane, flirting with heresy while embracing the beauty of spiritual motifs.
To your point, Hal, the novel presents an intricate dance with the divine, where characters like Stephen Dedalus grapple with their religious upbringing in the search for meaning.
And yet, Ireland's tension-filled history with Catholicism is the canvas Joyce paints on, making it nearly impossible to view the religious references outside this historical frame.
The duality is striking. Just as Joyce employs stream of consciousness to depict the inner workings of the mind, he uses religious themes to mirror the inner battle of faith and skepticism in a fast-changing world.
I think the blasphemy you mentioned, Mick, is Joyce's tool for liberation, from the constraints of a strict religious society and from historical dogmatism. It was his way of rebelling against the norms.
Rebellion? Sure, but to what end? The contemporary reader might struggle to find relevance in the deeply encoded religious allegory, given our secular orientations.
Yes, but isn't the very act of questioning religious doctrines a timeless pursuit, Lenny?
It is, Hal, and maybe that's where the genius lies. Joyce invites readers to question, not to provide answers, but to stimulate self-discovery in the spiritual realm.
Perhaps then Joyce is drawing us into a Dublin that mirrors the epochs of religious evolution, an Ireland in transition, caught between reverence and revolution.
He also reflects on the personal psyche, how religion influences one's identity, something we see in the struggle of characters, particularly Stephen.
And it's worth mentioning how Joyce uses religious language, subverting it, reshaping it to serve his narrative, hence how deeply ingrained these themes were in him.
That reshaping could, frankly, be seen as an erosion of sort, a dismantling of traditional spirituality in favor of a more humanistic approach.
Indeed, and as we move further into a secular age, Joyce's exploration of the sacred and the profane may become even more pertinent.
Anticipating a future literary tradition absent of religion, Hal? Well, I'd argue the spiritual inquiry is part of the human condition. We'll simply see new myths emerge. I think that's quite a projection, Jazz, and a Joyce in one at that. As for Ulysses, it's a rich spiritual annotation not only of an era, but of the human experience.
The challenge of translating Ulysses is formidable. The texture of Joyce's language, the allusions, the puns, how can one even begin to transfer that to another tongue without losing its essence?
It often feels like an act of hubris, attempting to transpose Joyce's verbal acrobatics into another language. Yet translators try. Almost every time, something vital is lost, but then again, something new can be born.
That's exactly it, Lenny. Translation is its own form of art. It's about capturing the spirit rather than a word-for-word transcription. And in the process, Ulysses finds new life in various cultural contexts.
It's much like adapting literature into film. The core must remain intact, but the form changes. It's about preserving cognitive resonance, not just the text.
Cognitive resonance is all well and good, Jazz, but the cultural context is just as important. After all, Joyce encapsulated the soul of Dublin. How do you translate that soul into another culture, another city's soul?
Translation is interpretation. It's like when I'm choosing how to present an art piece. There's my voice in there too. And frankly, with Ulysses, that's a necessary layer.
Perhaps it's this shared struggle of translators that creates a new collective understanding. Joyce, after all, used many languages in his work. Isn't that an invitation to engage with Ulysses as a linguistic puzzle?
An invitation or not, it's not just a puzzle, Hal. It's an experience that depends on linguistic nuances. I worry at times that translation simplifies Joyce's linguistic labyrinth into something digestible.
But Lenny, that simplification can also serve as a gateway. Not everyone has the luxury of reading the novel in its original English. Shouldn't we celebrate the attempt to democratize access to Joyce's work?
Amelia, you've struck a beautiful chord there. No translation is perfect, but it democratizes knowledge. It's about extending our cognitive maps, not confining them.
And that's a noble pursuit. Historically, think of how translation has opened up entire worlds. The way Greek philosophy was translated into Arabic and later into Latin, it reshaped the intellectual contours of Europe and the Middle East.
Absolutely. And can we even talk about democratizing knowledge without acknowledging the complexities of that process? It's messy, but this dialogue among translators enriches our understanding of Joyce.
As we consider these translations, are we also considering the evolution of Joyce's significance globally? The way Ulysses reflects and informs an ever-changing literary landscape.
Definitely, Hal. And not just literary landscapes. We're talking broader cultural dialogue, aren't we? Intertextual relationships that transcend borders.
And let's not forget technology's role in this. Machine learning and AI could transform translation, making Joyce's intricacy more accessible, if not entirely understood.
Intriguing thought, Jazz. Yet, no algorithm can fathom the human condition Joyce so brilliantly painted. It takes a human to capture that, and they must bring their own depth to it.
What is clear is that translating Ulysses is an ongoing cultural conversation as complex as Joyce's Dublin. We wrestle with his words, much as he wrestled with creating them. As we bring our discussion to a close, I'm reminded of the diverse interpretations and deep connections we've each made with Ulysses. It truly speaks to Joyce's multifaceted legacy, doesn't it?
Indeed, Hal. Our dialogue today has exemplified the richness of Joyce's work. Mick, your insights into the historical context have been enlightening.
Thank you, Amelia. Your feminist reading of Molly Bloom has given me much to think about as well. We must acknowledge the constraints of our time-limited format, but it's been a pleasure to traverse such intellectual ground with all of you.
That's particularly true. Each passionate argument, especially Lenny's challenges, have made this all the more stimulating. Lenny, I may not always agree, but your skepticism is vital.
I appreciate that, Izzy. Jazz, your futuristic lens is often a foil to my own skepticism, but it's a perspective that Joyce, I believe, would have admired for its inventiveness.
I'm grateful for the exchange of ideas. Izzy, your cultural connections always offer new angles, very much like those avant-garde films you mentioned.
It speaks volumes about Ulysses, that after all these years, our debate sparkles with such vivacity. Amelia, you've given a voice to the philosophical echoes between the pages, and that's been quite impactful.
That means a lot, Hal. But without the historical underpinnings Mick has provided, our understanding wouldn't be as rich.
And yet, Jazz, your futuristic outlook has me contemplating the Joyce of tomorrow, a thought experiment in its own right.
Mick, history molds the future, doesn't it? We build on the legacies left behind, as Joyce has with his predecessors. Our discussion, like Ulysses, is cyclical, never really ending. Amelia's cultural tapestry can't be unraveled in just one sitting.
True, Jazz. We could talk for hours more and still uncover new aspects of Joyce's world. Izzy's perspective on art and poetry alone could fill books.
Well, Lenny's incisive comments have a way of cutting right to the core of the matter, helping us peel back yet another layer of Joyce's narrative.
Flattered, Izzy, but it's Hal's philosophical ruminations that have often guided our discourse to profound territories.
One can only hope to match the depth of you all. As we conclude, let us remember, as exhaustive as our discussion has felt, we've merely skimmed the surface of this literary behemoth. Yet this is the beauty of Joyce. There will always be more to explore.
Agreed. Our thoughts, like Bloomsday, continue beyond the final page.
Stay tuned, friends, as we delve into the intricacies of Joyce's other works. Until then, let's carry the spirit of this conversation with us, the spirit of curiosity, debate, and unending inquiry.
And may our interpretations of Ulysses evolve just as humanity does, in ever-expanding spirals of understanding.
Cheers to that. Until next time.